Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Butterfly Effect podcast. Today we are analysing chapters 5 and 6 from the casting of Frank Stone. We're going to jump straight into it. Chapter 5, The Phantom of Steel Mill. We're in the 1980s timeline and the gang are basically trying to find ways or locations I should say, to shoot their film after they've learned about the Frank Stone thing. They really want to capitalise on it. Chris is really passionate about it. She's got articles, same with Robert as well. They've got articles and they're looking through things. There's potential angles of where they could go with it. I think Harmay, like we mentioned in the previous episode, Harmay's a little bit more skeptical about the whole idea. He thinks it's potentially disrespectful to the victims and is a little bit more cautious on it. Is there any sort of specific things that you wanted to bring up from this whole section, mate?
No, I guess it's pretty cool that you can kind of confide in Linda, but Linda's a bit, I tried to confide in her, but it seems like she's more with Chris and Robert, this is going to be a good film. So, you're kind of left there with a little bit of egg on your face. But, yeah, no, quite a cool sequence. It was like you can listen to the Tom Holt interview who backed Sam up. I don't know if you had a different interview because you said you had a frostier prologue with him, so that's kind of something I'm intrigued to know. But he seemed very kind of like backing of Sam and how this sheriff took the credit when he shouldn't have. And you know what? I was weirdly drawn to that kind of omniverse book that you can find at the back of the garage as well, and I was trying to think of relevances with that. But now, how about yourself?
I'm glad you brought that up because I found that book beforehand. And I don't know, you see it everywhere now, don't you, in games? I mean, heck, it's even going to happen in Life is Strange. It's potentially going to happen with Lost Records as well. Different timelines, different, multiverses, and it's all like the rage at the minute in the media. So, I saw this book and I was thinking, oh, okay, so there's going to be alternate realities and things. And I think because of, the blueprint thing that I found in the last episode, I was like, okay, that does marry up. Is this a hint of things where things are going to go? So that certainly was a clue that was on my mind, and I felt like it was one of the most important ones that I've found so far. But in terms of the tape, mate, yeah, it sounds very similar. Even though he had a frosty relationship, he still seemed like, he was backing Sam quite a lot on that tape. Quite cool as well because I did get an achievement for that. And actually, when you think about it, it seems like it was done in a similar way to the piano thing, like where you find an item, you then take it to another item, and then you get a little bit of, a bonus moment essentially, and then it triggers an achievement unlocked. But I don't think, to be honest, much else happens from here. They're just essentially going through these articles, aren't they, while you've got an opportunity to explore. So the gang then head down towards the grounds of the mill, and it's where we get a choice, mate. Did you climb or did you cross to get into the vicinity?
I know, mate, this is where we go different. I decided to cross, reason being safety. I didn't want to get caught, but also I thought longer route, potentially more chance to kind of just take in the scene, but also maybe find more collectibles.
Interesting, because the thing for me, this almost mirrors the Shady Glade versus the Rocky Road choice from the Quarry, doesn't it?
Yeah, I'm so glad we go different, mate. I'm so glad we go different because we can discuss it and find out the differences.
Yeah, it's the bread and butter, isn't it, of these videos. So yeah, I did the opposite to you. I chose to go and climb over the fence. And I think I was just curious as to what the potential jeopardy would be. I know that there was the risk of running into Sam, but I wanted to see what that would look like, It is something I've mentioned before where whether it's the longer-ish cut scenes or some of the exploring, I felt like I was ready for something more adrenaline inducing in this part. And I've got to say, as a negative, I was slightly disappointed because you do climb over, and I believe you can find a trinket on this side, but then the rest of the scene, it just plays out as a cut scene, and I was hoping that there'd be some QTEs or a different style of mini game where you've got to stay out of sight. maybe like the one they introduced in The Devil in Me, where you've got to like pick a spot and quickly hide or something. But it didn't. It just sort of played out as this cutscene where you're hiding behind some fence and Sam's looking out, and then he ultimately goes and walks away. So you didn't miss that much, mate. So did you want to tell me what happens when you cross over?
Yeah, so I mean, the big factor really, mate, is that you can't get all the collectibles, well, all the trinkets in one playthrough anyway, because you would have got the mother-daughter ring, which you can find in the fence, like, really early, the moment you get over the fence. For me, there's a lot of, like, going through the forest, a lot of, like, going around concrete, going over balance beams, and I got a different trinket. So, yeah, like, it's just two different collectibles. I guess I had more time for downtime and dialogue, and they mentioned quite a cool thing about Bonnie. They start talking about Bonnie, like, oh, is she going to be mad? You know, like, you've got the 20, like, but then they kind of, like, say all this stuff about how apparently back at school she used to be a bit of a goody two-shoes, and she created this club helping people pick up litter. So, quite an interesting bit of backstory that Bonnie wasn't always the total badass punk she is now. So yeah, but like otherwise, yeah, just a lot more dialogue. So yeah, I'm kind of like in hindsight, because I have played going over the fence, and I agree, I was a little bit underwhelmed because it's just a cutscene. There was no QTEs to do, was there? So yeah, a little bit disappointing. Yeah, one thing I will say, and this is a little bit of a nitpick, and it's kind of a bit more pertinent to like when you get in the storm drain as well, but in these video games, when you've got NPCs, and especially the fact that we're playing as Chris and there's Linda, Robert, and Jaime walking around, I did find it not frustrating, like I could get around it quite easy, but there were times where the NPCs would strongly get in my way. I don't know if this is just something that happens when you cross and not climb, but it was always Jaime as well, mate. Jaime would always just stand in front of me, and my character would get slightly caught on him, and I'd have to walk around him a lot. Then, like, when you get in the storm drain, I instantly look back to see if there was a clue or a trinket behind me, and I couldn't get through him. And it wasn't quite as bad as, like, House of Ashes, where Jason can lock Salim in a cell, but I had to do a lot of wriggle work in getting around. There was a point where Jaime and Linda were just blocking me from getting through while Robert was bombing ahead in the storm drain. So yeah, like, not too much of a nitpick. It didn't like make me have to reload the game, but there were times where I found the NPC slightly infuriating at this point as well, lad. But what I want to ask you, because I've monologued for quite a while there, do you kind of wish that you crossed after hearing what I've told you about like the Bonnie and the extra dialogue bits you get?
I think so. But mind you, and this is where I'm going to hit a question back at you actually. Maybe it doesn't relate at all. Maybe I just miss out on that dialogue, but equally it could be that it's now brought forward because of this feature. I've got it written down here that there are periodic times in the game where you're walking around and you're exploring. And for me, mate, it come up chat and you like had to hit Y. It was sort of like a QTE. There was like a timer on it. So I don't know, I can't remember if I did get that dialogue you was mentioning about or not now. But it is something new that we've not had before in a supermassive game, and I just wondered what your take on it was.
Yeah, I quite like it because it means that you kind of have to pay attention, and it means that if you replay the game, maybe you can't be asked and you want to steam through, and you can avoid the dialogue, like maybe you just want downtime and silence, you can avoid it if you want. One thing I quite like as well is that there was a time when I went back and I climbed and I tried to crawl through the fence to get the trinket. Right as I crawled through the fence, the option to hit, it's F on PC, to hit F, like it like went away because I started like, you know, squeezing through like this rock. And then the button would appear back, so like in case like you do a cutscene or an action which cancels the dialogue, you can just resume it. And I quite like that because for a minute I thought I lost a bit of dialogue. But yeah, no, not a bad feature.
Yeah, I certainly liked it. I mean, and that's what you were saying there, is that if you really just want to steam through and you're not interested in talking to anyone, you can just choose to not hit the button. But it keeps you on your toes, doesn't it? And if you do want to find out more about the characters, and like I say, I do probably wish that I crossed now just to get that bit more on Bonnie. But nonetheless, I think having little features like that for extra dialogue, I think is a welcome thing in the game. We then come down into the storm drain again, mate. Ultimately, the furnace. Now, this is something I'm going to raise now. I'll probably end up raising it again later on, over along this series. Again, it's a slight nitpick, and I'm going to say that there does seem to be certain locations where you revisit one too many times, in my opinion. Don't get me wrong, I like the storm drain, and it was pretty cool coming back to it for a second time, you know, just to see how different it looks, and actually for the mill itself with all like the weeds and how overgrown it was. But I feel like when you ultimately go to it again later on, it does feel a little bit of overkill. Potentially a hot take, this, mate, but what's your opinion on that?
No, like, I get what you're saying. I do think that it kind of is fine for me on the pure basis, and as you kind of alluded to there, that it is in a different timeline, and I quite liked the different props you had, the fact that like teens have obviously begun going in there and there was graffiti everywhere. I quite liked that, but and I also think that it always gives you at least a few additional rooms, because I think, you know, you'll go back to this place as Sam way later in the game, and like they'll give you a bunch of new like sort of tunnels and sort of doors to explore and stuff. So I feel like, yeah, there are like definitely the same hallways and same paths that you will tread, but I do think they give you enough to make sure it's not totally a dud. Because like I know like a load of people were sick of me trashing Little Hope, but like I can think of that one example where you go through that museum as the two characters, and in the next scene you go through the exact same museum again, and like you can look at the same props, and it serves nothing. There's nothing that does for you. But in this one I quite like it because it's not back to back, and it is with different timelines and with different rooms. So I don't know, I guess I give it more of a forgive on that one.
Ah, that's fair, mate. Moving on, I mean, they obviously get through the storm drain and then they're in like some yard thing. There's a point I wanted to raise to you. I've mentioned it already in that like some previous Supermassive games do get like little nods in this. But there's another very disturbing topic that seems to rear its head, mate. And it's all about like this incest thing that we picked up on in Little Hope. I don't know if you noticed it in this. But do you find it a bit odd how like Harmay and Chris, they're in like a romantic relationship, obviously, but they're playing as brother and sister in the movie? It just immediately took me back to Little Hope.
Yeah, no, it is true actually. I never thought about that, but yeah, like and maybe it's like a little bit of like a foreshadow how like they're kind of probably more suited as friends and a sibling dynamic than an actual couple, you could say. But yeah, no, for definitely.
Yeah, because I do feel like there are under the surface things, and it does seem to be rooted in Harmay quite a bit, because as I've mentioned, you've got the potential love triangle with Chris and Robert. But jumping forward a little bit, actually later on, like Linda has a conversation with Bonnie and they talk about the future and stuff, and I'm like, have I picked up that Linda might be into Harmay here? So like there are like certain things going on that I was thinking, okay, I hope that these do get fleshed out. Unfortunately they didn't, because I'll get to that very shortly. But yeah, you know, they was trying essentially to like force some more romantic relationships in this, but the fact that this incest thing come up again, it was just, I don't know, it was just a bit funny. I had to acknowledge it. But moving on, we do then get like a little jump scare from Bonnie. She's clearly followed the group after getting intrigued by what they were up to in the garage. And I don't know, do you want to take it from here, mate? Like when we get into the buildings and we're like looking around for trinkets and solving puzzles and stuff?
Yeah, sure. So just a nice little bit of downtime. It's funny. It was like, oh yeah, Bonnie shouldn't be here, or I don't mind Bonnie tagging along. I think, you know, no points, you know, to guessing what I picked there. Yeah, I just want to say, like, we kind of mentioned it in the first part, but I want to bring it up again. But one thing Until Dawn lacks that this game does so well is how difficult some of the trinkets are to find, and the fact that you have to puzzle solve to get around like the map to find collectibles. and I absolutely love that. I really like the one where you've got to get the crank in this bit to then like kind of bring the trinket over to you. One thing that Frank Stone does better than Until Dawn, and we've mentioned this in part 1 analysis, but the puzzles you use. So there's the one with the crank lever to get the trinket. I'm not saying the game's better than Until Dawn, but doing stuff like that is a certain way to at least compete with Until Dawn. I don't know if you like really enjoyed the exploration and the puzzle sections of this chapter, mate.
I did. I really did. I mean, that one that you was on about there, I did like, because, do you know what I mean? You had to think a bit. He's like, okay, so to get to that, you need to wind that. So you need to go and look for a part. It did get more complex in the future rooms, didn't it? And don't get me wrong, this is not a criticism on the puzzle at all. It's just the fact that I was playing it so late at night that I was like, oh God, this is the worst time for me to have to start using my brain. But I think, was it in the casting shed? I think it was in the casting shed, and there was one sort of wall with like a hole in it, and you could find a relic. And then there was a room where you could move this red box around. I couldn't quite work out where you had to put it, because I knew you was going to have to ultimately vault on it. But so much so that I nearly pushed it out the door at the end of the room at one point. But eventually I stumbled on to, getting it in the right spot so I could hop up, shimmy round, and then leap across to get the trinket. But you're right, it's so much better than just walking through an environment. It's so much better because you're just more engaged with the game. You're thinking about how, like, this particular room or environment that you're in, how you've got to manipulate it in order to get something as simple as a collectible. So yeah, I really liked it, mate, and I really liked the fact that they upped the ante on puzzles in this game, full stop.
Big time. I mean, the scene afterwards kind of thing, like, we get the whole section where Linda gets her shot, doesn't she, that she's been begging for. And I was really happy this happened, because I know Chris is the director, but, like, I like the idea of everyone being able to chip in and pitch ideas, and it's really lovely to see Linda got her scene. But then, I mean, not that, like, Bonnie's not justified in saying this, but she does absolutely flip out of nowhere. So she's, like, snuck along, she had nothing better to do, so she followed the group, and now she's like flipped off at Jaime for like making this thing that's kind of a bit of a parallel to their lives. And then they kind of split off outside, don't they? So yeah, and like I'll go more into what I think about their conversation later, because like there's a potential romance angle there as well, maybe, at least from one side anyway. But yeah, I guess like then it kind of breaks off Linda, and then we get into the Chris section where we get even more of those puzzle sections, don't we? Where we're going into the machine room. Now, this section was quite kind of long, but in a way where I didn't mind, because like we've had the long dialogue scenes, but now like we've got this absolute warehouse where we have to go and find a way to fix this generator. And as you've probably guessed, because these generators pop up like once, twice, 3 times throughout the game. But yeah, another DBD reference. So like, yeah, obviously the QuickTime events I've spoken about, how they're the generators, but they've just straight up given us some Dead by Daylight gameplay, lad. As a non-DBD fan, did you quite enjoy having to find generator parts and fixing it?
Yeah, I really did. At this point, I really did. It sounds like this is going to be a criticism. It is a bit of a nitpick. But moving forward into the game as well, and I know that this is a DBD game technically, so they're really trying to hit the beats and stuff. But I do think that once or twice using the same gimmick is fine. I think going 3, 4, 5 times, I think it gets a little bit much. So at this point, looking for the parts to power the generator, to go to the room and get the key and all that, do you know what I mean? It feels, it feels okay. I do think that the generator thing does get a little bit gimmicky and overused as the game goes on, though, because it's like, oh, come on, really? There's another generator that's missing parts and needs the power on, So, like, there is a part of me that I understand it, even though I'm a non-DBD fan, because it's like a homage to that. But there's like the rational, realistic part of my brain that's like, okay, like I've got what you're doing here, but we're just repeating stuff that I've seen already, earlier on in the game.
For sure, because for me, like, Until Dawn had no puzzles, the quarry throws us one, but it's a breaker puzzle where it's very difficult to understand. A lot of people killed Jacob off at the cell, and then the devil and me give us another breaker type puzzle, which is the same one over and over again, and it's just a bit naff. This game, like, it's definitely the best game we've got in terms of puzzle solving, because like we've got one in the big green room we're going to see later. You've got the exploration puzzles to get around the map, but then you also have the generator ones, which are quick time event based. So like in terms of the puzzle solving, there was like kind of a lot of variety in the game, but it almost tried to pay homage to DBD in the puzzles, almost maybe too much, to the point that is the one quick time event thing you kind of get in Dead by Daylight, and you could argue, yeah, I agree, they probably did it to death a little bit too much.
Now, another thing I wanted to bring up as well, mate, that happened in this chapter is they introduced us to that new camera mechanic, didn't they? Now, we didn't necessarily see a villain through the camera at this point, but I just wanted your take on it, like whether it's at this bit, maybe, you know, give us a hint of what your thoughts are of how it was used later on. But did you like the introduction of like the whole camera thing?
No, I'll elaborate. I'm not gonna lie, to be honest, I want to defend the game a little bit because it could just be me being a dumbass, but I did not understand what was going on. It was like, oh yeah, reel it down, and I kept doing it, and then the thing flashed red, and then I didn't really get a second chance to try again. So I was like, oh my god, that mechanic is probably going to come up again, and I have no idea what just happened. I don't know if it wasn't indicated strongly enough, or if I was just being a bit of an idiot. But yeah, I don't know if you share my sentiment, or if anyone in the comments shares my sentiment. But later on I got to grips with it, but like, when you have to use it when you're in jeopardy. But yeah, right at the start I was kind of like, what the hell was that about?
Yeah, it's probably not the best example, is it, in this particular chapter, because all you're doing is you're looking through it and you've seen some like green dots, you know, flying about all like in the camera frame. You've not actually got anything like a monster or whatever to like point it at. But do you know what I mean? It's a different type of gameplay. I'm glad that they're experimenting with putting different things in there for us as the player to get used to, because I think naturally sometimes things can get a little bit stale. In terms of what my overall thoughts like of its effectiveness were, though, I will come to that in a future episode. Another quick point I'm going to add as well is, you know, that bit you mentioned it earlier where like Linda's like shooting the scene with Harmay and Chris. It did make me laugh. It would probably be good to put this alongside as I'm saying this, but like you see this scene and I don't know why, but for Linda, for some reason, she does the same thing as she did earlier on. You know, when she like zoomed in too much earlier and like missed the blood gag. She does the same thing again, and I just think that her camera skills are absolutely woeful. And I'm like, how on earth did she become a filmmaker? Because like as they're about to kiss, or as they're like looking at each other intensely, she just starts to zoom in, and it like unnecessarily like focuses on like Harmay's chin. And I don't know what it is, that there's just something about that absolutely cracked me up, mate. Like if you've not seen it or can't remember it, then do look at it back and it'll just stick out like a sore thumbnail.
There's no way the audience in the cinemas flew into a violent rage. They were angry at her camera skills.
Yeah, that's so true, yeah.
But for real, that might be why she wants to forget Murder Mill. Not because of the horror memories, because it was like her worst film that she made.
Yeah, another thing as well, we come back to it, this whole love triangle thing, because Harmay and Robert do talk to one another at this point, don't they? There's a couple of choices here. I think I was playing as Harmay, and I did play it down. It did want to... There was an option, wasn't there? Like, do you want to be suspicious? And I think I didn't. I was like, you know, just try and play it down because I don't think there's enough there. But I do stand by the point that I made in the last episode that I think that Robert and Chris are more suited to one another.
Yeah, no, I completely get you. It did that dialogue thing where it was like, did you want to be a little bit salty or very salty? And I didn't want to do either, so I really wasn't a fan of that dialogue choice. Because I was of the mindset like, nah, Chris is with me. If she wants to end it, she can end it, but I'm not gonna like, you know, play the jealous boyfriend card. But you almost had to a little bit. But like, you can either say like, oh, I just wanted to spend time with her alone, and you look like a dick saying that, or you can be like, look, bro, you're spending a lot of time with my girlfriend. Funnily enough, though, mate, I did the same as you, but I have played that scene again, and I did pick those dialogue options just to see what happens. And it's quite interesting, and I wish I picked it on my first time because something really fascinating comes out of it. And that is that Robert looks at you and says, look, bro, like, whenever we hang out together, me and her, 80% of the time she's just talking about you, and it actually gets kind of annoying a little bit. So I think it almost goes into the whole thing of like how it's just completely in Jaime's head, and that she's so glued in on this film project that like maybe Jaime feels like left out a little bit. But yeah, no, so I don't know what you make of that, mate.
No, I like it, and perhaps it then, if Robert's being truthful there, it's sort of more suggesting that maybe he's more into Chris, but yeah, it's just not reciprocated. She's just completely blinded by it. She sees him as a friend and is more interested in like the movie and then perhaps Harmo second. But yeah, like it's like I said before, I do wish that this triangle or square, however you want to see it, if you involve Linda, I wish that could be potentially explored a little bit more. I'll have to see in future playthroughs. So yeah, once you've fixed the generator and you've got the key and you're heading up into like the freight trailer, we do ultimately get to a point where on this balcony, Harme and Chris jump through, and then Robert jumps through, and there's a skill check that comes at you very quickly. Now, I did pass it. Did you pass it as well, mate?
Narrowly. I wasn't paying attention. I was drinking, and I hit the space bar, and it was like an atom away from me failing it, mate.
Interesting. So do you know what happens then if you do fail it?
Yeah, no, it's interesting because like I did it again with a chaos playthrough, and I deliberately failed the QTE. And it's interesting because I thought maybe he would drop and hurt his leg and then like play the rest of the game with an injury or something. But now what happens is Chris goes for Robert instead. And with that, like they just absolutely go to town scolding you. And it kind of builds off of the conversation you had with Robert earlier where Robert thinks you've done it deliberately. But it's really horrible for Jaime. It's kind of amusing, but yeah, it's just horrible that like your girlfriend and the guy you're jealous of are, absolutely insulting and ripping you to shreds.
Because I must admit, like, obviously I did pass it, but I think then Robert then delivers a line saying, "Oh, that would have been a horrible way to go." So I remember passing that skill check and thinking, "Oh, like, could Robert have like had a death there?" Like, obviously not a playable character, but I thought it could have been one that he just simply falls to his death and smacks his head or something like that. But no, fair enough. I mean, we move on. They then go into this room, and it's a serial killer's den, really, isn't it, mate? There's jars with heads and arms and hands and all different body parts all around the room. I think there's a couple of things that we get to find in here as well. Did you have any comments on this scene?
Not really, just pretty terrifying. I actually quite like the delivery of like the way the characters jump when you take the dust off the jar with the head in it, because like Jaime like kind of freaks out and then Robert's like, what is it? And then he freaks out like from a distance. And I don't know, sometimes I look at this game and I feel like we could talk about the branching, the choices, the music, but I feel like some credit has to go to the actors and the performances as well, because I just really believed there were a bunch of teens who were scared in over their heads.
Absolutely, and actually, like, a good example of that is shortly thereafter, where Robert's then like, right, seriously, something's going on, something wrong is going on here, guys. Like, I'm gonna go get my dad. This is like a police matter now. And you can not just really believe the acting. I'm thinking like Robert is like the voice of reason here, makes perfect sense. But then Harme's like, no, don't. And it's just, I don't know. Like I remember even saying this in the stream at this point. For some reason, I was just like really sort of suspicious of like Harme. Like I was just thinking like, what's going on, man? Like it's quite clear that police need to be on the scene now, and they're like, don't touch the evidence because obviously that's important evidence in like a long-standing case. But Harme, I can almost see, and it was sort of at this point it sort of told me I could see why that he was sort of slightly an outcast. It's been building ever since the start of chapter 3 when he was reluctant to go to the mill, and there's just a lot of instances now where this guy feels that he is slightly sidelined, but by his own token, he's doing it himself.
Yeah, big time. It's weird, isn't it? Because Chris is against the movie making almost. Like, he's kind of all skeptical, like, oh, this is a bit disrespectful. And then he goes with them. And then the minute Robert and Chris are like, oh God, we're in over our heads, we need to go and report this, then Jaime flip-flops, and it's like, mate, you've just wrong side, wrong time, what are you doing, buddy?
Yeah, exactly. So then after that, it's quite apparent that like shit's starting to go down. I don't know what it is. This green stuff starts to come off of all the jars and things, and it starts to build up. And there's a very tense scene that follows to end this chapter. So it looks like, to be honest, I can't explain it even at this point. I don't know really what's happening, what's going down here. But a lot of it starts to congeal and come together and start to build the skeleton of Frank Stone. Next thing you know, there's a door that's been blown open, and there's like some sort of like green swirl, which I didn't know at the time was going to be a time portal, which sort of informs you of what my next choice was going to be. But mate, let's cut to the chase. Your Jaime, Chris, is going to get sucked into the green hole thing. You've got a demon in front of you. It says confront or flee. What did you do?
I confronted. I was like, because the other thing as well is that you've just had a conversation, haven't you, about with Chris as Jaime about like the potential breakup that can happen. So like, I had a really good chat. I was an adult and was like, yeah, look, I'm sorry. We still love each other. Rah. And then I was like, immediately, they're almost clever for doing that, because the moment you have a conversation like that, you kind of want to back it up, don't you? So I was like, well, I'm going to confront, because I was like, I don't want a character dead here. I feel like, and maybe I am an idiot. I saw your playthrough as well, and you said, oh, think about it Little Hope-wise. And it's a good point, there is that whole thing about, facing your fears or whatever. But, like, I don't know, the game punishes you for confronting, unless you have firecrackers, apparently. But what I will say, mate, I've gone back and I've got firecrackers, and I still confronted, and I still got Jaime sliced. So I don't know if it's because I broke up with Chris in that version. Maybe their relationship needs to be good. But someone in the comments, please clarify, how do you save Jaime by confronting and using the firecrackers? Like, I need to know on that one, because I've killed him twice now. But yeah, Jack, tell us about your one.
So I did the exact same. I chose to confront, and I literally went with the logic of Little Hope, confront the demon. And I don't know if that was in like the dev's mind, but it certainly worked against me. I didn't know about the firecrackers thing at the time, but we've got so used to these games whereby, like, if you do the nice thing, then it's going to pay dividends for you. So I was like, okay, well, let's do it again, do the nice thing, and it will all work out fine. Only to then get cut in half, which I quite like, because we did do a video, one of our oldest videos, the 7 Deadly Sins of Supermassive Games, where we said that, life isn't like that. You shouldn't be able to do the nice thing and always get a nice outcome. And, well, mate, Supermassive delivered on that score. So, 1 death already registered, and I was a little bit gutted, because I was like, damn, I was hoping to try and keep them all alive, but there we go, Jaime dead.
Yeah, we've killed our first character, lad. And you know what? It is quite reminiscent of Matt and Emily, isn't it, in Until Dawn, where if you actually try and save your girlfriend, it bites you in the balls a little bit. But yeah, you know what? I wasn't salty with this death. I was like, it was a 50-50 choice. I got it wrong. Let's move on, Let's stick with my guns, see what happens without Jaime in my game.
Okay, so that was the end of Chapter 5. But before we do move on to Chapter 6, mate, have you got any other points you want to add before we do move on?
Nah, lad, I'm happy to move on. Just to say, though, that for people watching our future analysis, I've not played my repeat of the game without Jaime in it. So just so you know, our analysis is going to be very without Jaime. We don't really know the relevance of his character if he's alive. So bear that in mind as we do our analysis.
Good stuff. So next chapter, Chapter 6, Beyond the Gate. We're back in the 2024 timeline now. And I suppose it kicks off really because you've got to solve how to get past that big gate in that room upstairs, right? And something was a little bit suspicious. Again, it comes back to what I was saying about Stan of not knowing who he is and where he fits into this picture. He just reaches into a hole and pulls this lever, which opens to a gate that leads to upstairs. But essentially, we've got another puzzle section, mate, whereby we've got to get the key to open the thing and then put the tree diorama in, which then gets the little hammer to put on the statue and so on. After having such like puzzle heavy levels in chapter 5, was you okay with having another one at the start of chapter 6?
I think so, because this one was kind of different. It was finding collectibles in the manor, and you had to go to different floors. I quite liked as well that it made you backtrack going back down the stairs to pick up the tree. And a lot of it, was very heavily to do with DBD. Like, I clocked on the hillbilly statue. He is a killer in the game. He's the first relic you would have picked up. And then the whole clue is to do with this hillbilly. One thing that I kind of want to ask you, though, is did you have a tough time when you eventually solved the puzzle, scrolling through the wheels kind of thing to kind of get the right images? Because for me it was, oh yeah, that's the DBD, it relates to that and that. Did you kind of have to guess a little bit, or could you kind of salve it yourself?
You know what, I weirdly did. My logic being was that I was using the items that I'd just picked up. So I'm pretty sure one of them was a tree, right? So when I saw a tree, I was like, okay, that's going to be one of them. I think, pardon me, the far right one was the hammer, which was literally the piece that we just added onto the statue. So I picked that. It was only the first one where I was scrolling. I think it ended up being the house. And I was like, okay, well, I'm in a manor. So whether that was the correct logic or not, I don't know, but then it just triggered the cutscene to open the gate. So I was like, oh, I must have been right. So maybe I got lucky there. But no, that particular bit didn't take me long at all, mate.
Oh, fair. Yeah, I think it's just what was in that picture of the house, with the totem and the hillbilly in it when you unlock it with the key. But yeah, nice little section. And then obviously, mate, we get a bit of a museum section, don't we?
We do, and I really like this section. The first thing I'm going to point out is, and we had this in the stream actually, where you get to see some certain things from the old Supermassive games. So the first one I spotted, which could be a stretch, but I think there's a good chance it is a nod to Until Dawn. There's this picture on the wall, and it looks like there's this wooden hut that's on fire, but then there's these demon ghost things coming out, and it literally just reminded me of that classic shot of Until Dawn at the end, where the lodge is on fire and the Wendigo spirits are coming out. And I was thinking that's got to be a subtle Easter egg to Until Dawn, but because it's not Supermassive property, maybe they had to be a little bit more subtle about it. Whereas the House of Ashes one with the Akkadian demon seeing Pazuzu, they could specifically point that out because they do the DPA games, it's part of their what they've done previously. It's not owned by anybody else. So I really like seeing the little things around the museum, mate. How about yourself?
Yeah, no, exact same, mate. Not too much to add. Just the fact that, I think I even saw the House of Ashes, the eggs as well from the vampire demon things. I think they were anyway. But yeah, it was. It's an interesting one because the games don't tend to at least the mainstay blockbuster games don't really cross over a hell of a lot. And I was really surprised to see House of Ashes in here, mate, because I thought DPA would be something kept completely separate, but now they added a Pazuzu or an Akkadian demon in there, which very interesting.
It's fan service, isn't it? It's gotta be. It's gotta be for those. Obviously, how this is a DBD game, so there's going to be things that I've never played DBD, so there's going to be loads of things that I'm not picking up on. Equally, there's going to be Dead by Daylight fans that are entering this game and they know zero about DPA, the Quarry, Until Dawn, etc. So they're not necessarily going to pick up on these things, but I feel like it's perhaps a slight balancing out. It's still rewarding those old-time Supermassive fans by noticing the little Easter eggs that they've put throughout the game. You know what? It reminds me, just before we do go into the museum, you do find like a newspaper article about like, or was it a magazine article about how the Murder Mill film can incite violence in like audiences when they go and see it. And this is one story strand that I felt like had significance, and I felt like I cracked it by the time I saw the end of chapter 14. But is it me, mate? Are you still a little bit confused as to how that little thread is relevant in like the whole plot, or have you like figured it out?
I think I figured it out. I mean, the thing I kind of got is that like the camera clearly has something supernatural going on with the green glow we saw earlier. And Stan and that article did say, oh yeah, like I heard rumors that like the audience blew out into a murderous rage when they watched the film or whatever. So clearly I was like, okay, something is up with this camera and this film, and it's been tainted by something supernatural. And I won't say anything more than that, but like obviously you can kind of like gather it's something to do with that.
Yeah, because where my mind was going was that it was something to, fast forward into the end, is that it's like, something comes out of the screen and then starts killing like the members of the audience. But it's talking about how like the audience goes into like murderous fits of rage. So I don't know, I feel like maybe it's something I need to look at more closely, but I just didn't quite understand how this little thread fits into the big picture. So obviously moving back into the museum, not much else happens really. We do have this moment where you can find this this passage in a book about the keepsakes of previous victims, which I thought was something to keep an eye on, and again is something that's going to become relevant later on in the game. But they're basically these things, what they call talismans of protection, where if you wear them, you can therefore be protected. But what I didn't spot at the time was that the word protect was circled in red with question marks in it, which may or may not come back to bite me later on, guys. You'll have to see, unless you've already seen my playthrough. But yeah, I mean, it then ends with a certain someone coming up the elevator. I obviously predicted that Sam was outside earlier, so I was pretty confident that it was going to be him. But any sort of points on that whole chapter, mate, in the museum?
Just that I didn't know it was Sam, so I kicked the guy in the leg. Very sorry, Sam. Did you do that?
I did know it was Sam, and I still kicked him. Yeah.
It's like, yeah, we're both just violent beings, mate, to be honest.
It makes me laugh. Like, clearly Liebe has got to do all those steps every single time she wants to get into the museum. So she's got to get the key, open that, head upstairs or head downstairs, get the tree, pop that in, pop the thing in, and then there's Sam who just like goes up in one elevator. He's in the museum.
Oh my God, yeah.
How does that work?
Yeah, true. It's like Augustine would be great at making escape rooms or working at Escape Hunt or something. But yeah, geez, how has Sam done that? The only thing I want to comment on is you just mentioned earlier that book with like the pendants that protect you, and you had the red circle and then the question mark. This is a fresh reaction of me. I have just learnt something that does come and bite me, and now I know why. So like, I'm glad you clarified that for me, mate.
I think maybe we've got an exact same circumstance later on, but we'll have to find out. Okay, guys, so that's it. Obviously, that was the analysis of chapters 5 and 6 of the Casting of Frankstone. Do let us know your comments in the comments section, as well as your choices. We'll look forward to reading and replying to them. You got anything to add, mate?
Nah, thank you very much, though. We'll see you guys in the next one.
Catch you later.